Welcome, everybody. Welcome for tonight's Q&A with editor Caroline Bleeke. So I'm going to give you all a few minutes to get in here so that we could start. Just going to give you all a few minutes. Hi, everybody. Caroline, how
Hi,
are
Angie.
you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
You're so on time. I was like, let me just give it a few minutes.
I was paranoid about hitting the wrong button, but I seem to be here.
Okay, you did good. You did good. I just want to give people a few minutes. They're rolling in. People always ask for this type of content and this type of information. So we're going to get into it with Caroline. Hi, Peggy. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to introduce myself. I think, Caroline, you froze. Ooh, not a good thing, Caroline. But I am going to introduce myself. My name is Angela Abreu. Many people call me Angie, and I am the founder and creative director of Dominican Writers Association. What is Dominican Writers Association? Dominican Writers Association supports the works mainly of Dominican American writers who are located in the diaspora. So when I speak about support, I speak about promoting your work, promoting your books. We offer writing workshops. We have a writers conference that we do, trying to do it every year, but this year was going to be our second conference and COVID said, no way, it's not happening. So we're aiming for 2021. And we also have a small imprint where we publish just mainly Dominican American writers in the genre of poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction. If you want to know more about our work, please visit our website at www.dominicanwriters.com. You just go through all the links because sometimes I get people asking me questions that is already on the website. Click in the About section, get to know who our board members are. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. Most of our programming is offered for free because we apply for grants and we're able to provide that programming for free. And sometimes we charge a small stipend just to pay our facilitators and other people who provide services through the platform. So that's an introduction about who we are. And today we have a Q&A with editor Caroline Bleeke. And Caroline works for Flatiron, which is one of the big 5 publishing houses, right? You're under the Macmillan umbrella, correct?
Yep, that's right.
Okay. And Caroline, I know you more, Caroline, because you were the editor who got your hands on Angie Cruz Dominicana.
Yes, I was actually just right before this watching one of her virtual events because the paperback came out.
Yes, I missed that. I was in traffic trying to get home, and I missed that conversation. But I'm excited, even more so excited to speak to you, not because you're going to talk to us about the life cycle of a book, but because I'm always interested in speaking to those people who are publishing writers of color, right? Because as we know, the publishing industry is about 74% white, the staff, and our stories are not being picked up as much as stories written by Caucasians and other groups, right? So those are one of the things as well that I want to speak about. But I want to let everybody know, everyone who's joining this live, that if you do have any questions, please wait until the end of the conversation. Drop your questions in the question mark icon at the bottom of your screen, because otherwise, if you ask the question in the comment section, it's going to get lost. But if you click on the question mark icon, I could see all the questions in one place and I could ask Caroline your questions. So Caroline, you've been so gracious, and I want to say once again, thank you so much, because From the beginning, even in our first conference, when I invited you and said, you know, would you be one of our Manuscript subscribers, reviewers, you said sure. So you always say yes to me, and I'm grateful for that. And I just want you to, if there's something that I missed in my introduction about the type of work that you do, please do share, and let's get into this conversation.
Great. Well, thank you. Before that, I just want to say thank you so much for having me and for doing this event and for all the work you do with Dominican Writers Association. You guys are amazing. And I'm just happy to be here and answer whatever people want to know about publishing. I know it can seem extremely opaque from the outside, so hopefully I can shed a little bit of light on the inner workings of kind of my day-to-day life.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So let's start off, Caroline. What is the first thing a writer should do when they finish a manuscript? Well, yeah. To clarify, because we do have some writers who ask us, what is a manuscript?
Yes, let's get to basics. I feel like publishing is full of all these.
Are you okay?
Disappeared. I'm back. Yeah, so publishing is filled with all these jargon terms, but a manuscript is basically what we call the draft of a novel or nonfiction book or short story collection or whatever it is that you've written, that you're sending to agents, and your literary agent will then be sending it out to publishers. So the very first thing that you should do when you finish your manuscript, first of all, congratulations. That's the biggest hurdle. Like you've done your book. So I know sometimes it doesn't feel like that, but that really is the most important thing. Is then figuring out who you're going to query on the agenting side. So one really good thing to do that I always suggest is think about the books that are most similar to yours in terms of subject matter, the tone, the audience, like kind of where on a bookshelf would it sit if you were to go into your favorite independent bookstore, you know, like where would it be in the store? And then do a little bit of research to figure out which agents are representing those books. And one really good shortcut way to do that is look in the acknowledgements page, because usually the author will thank their agent and their editor. So that can be kind of a nice way to figure out, you know, who is representing books that you admire. You can also, you know, most agencies have websites, so you can kind of go in there and see the bios of the different agents, and there's a lot of databases available. But it's really important, you know, that person is going to be your advocate. They're going to be the one to kind of position it to publishers. So it's really important that you find an agent who will be a good fit for you. And then once you have your list, then you can start sending your query letters out. So this is another publishing term, but a query letter is basically, it's almost like a cover letter for your book. So, so some really important things to put in that, obviously like a short description of the book. I would say shorter and more concise, the better. Like a little can go a long way. You don't want to give too much away, but kind of give a sense of the subject matter. You know, if it's a novel, like a little bit of the plot. If it's a memoir, you know, give kind of a teaser of your personal story. So that's an important part of it. You want to tell the agent a little bit about you. So if you have previously published anything, like for instance, you've written an essay that was published somewhere, or you have a popular blog or a Twitter account, or you know, you did a MFA program somewhere, or you're part of the Dominican Writers Association, like anything that can kind of give them a sense of your background that would be relevant to them representing you. So it doesn't have to be kind of a full resume with all of your different job experiences, but it can also be really helpful to put in some personal details. Like if, you know, I'm thinking, for instance, about Dominicana, Angie's book, like it was really meaningful to me to see that it was inspired in part by her mother's story, and that she, you know, she grew up in Washington Heights, which is where the novel is set. Like, obviously it's not like it's a novel, it's a work of imagination, but it was just really useful for me to see kind of the origins of where the story came from, and how it was inspired by people very close to her in her life. So definitely include that kind of detail if you have it. If you did, you know, some like interesting kind of research trip for the writing of it, or, you know, and anything that you think would just help someone understand why you came to write this book and what kind of background, you know, makes you the perfect author to have written this book.
Is there a page limit to a query? What's too much when you query someone?
Yeah, definitely. I would probably try to keep it to about a page. And I know that doesn't seem like very much, but you know, these agents are getting so much in, and especially if you're kind of cold querying people, like if you don't have a direct route, you're just kind of sending it in. I think it's good to like kind of try to grab their attention in as succinct a way as you can. And, you know, down the road, obviously, if they represent you, you'll have a chance to tell them much more about you, and they can help you decide what will be most useful to editors and like what editors will really want to know. But I would say if you can keep it between a page to 2 pages, that's probably ideal. And then in addition to the query letter, you're going to send a sample of the material. So that's usually just the first, you know, 30 pages or so of the book. And I would say, again, think about like trying to grab this person's attention if you can. Like if there's a particular section of the book that you think is especially riveting or especially telling of what the book is like as a whole, that might even be a better selection to send than the beginning. You just kind of want to put your very best foot forward and you know, try to make your submission pop
stand out
all the other things that they're going to be getting in. Yeah.
Wonderful. Now, what is the job of a literary agent, and does everybody need a literary agent?
Yes. So first of all, no, you don't need one. Because I'm, you know, my experience is working for these larger publishers where usually there's policies in place where they only want agented submissions. And back in the day, publishing houses had what's called a slush pile. And so like when I was an intern in college, I was tasked with going through the slush pile. And that was basically just a pile of manuscripts that came in, you know, in the mail from authors. And you would hear stories like Julia Child's cookbook, for instance, is like a famous example of a book that came in through the slush pile. But most publishers now, because there's so many agents out there, I would say it's probably best to get an agent if you can. And also just because that person will be able to represent you, they'll be able to get you a good deal. Like they'll make sure that you're not taken advantage of. And also I think it's nice that in the editor-author relationship, it doesn't have to really be financial. Like the agent is kind of dealing with the contract and the advance. And so the relationship between the editor and the author can be more, you know, editorial and more about the book itself. So, you know, like if you've queried a bunch of agents and no one's coming through, don't feel like that's the end of the road. Like there's definitely ways to continue to get published. There are a lot of small presses that will accept unagented submissions. One really good way to catch the eye of an agent is to win a prize, like win an early manuscript prize. And I don't have a list off the top of my head of some of the good ones, but
well, there's the Pen America one, right? And the Quelly Journal as well gives prizes for emerging writers and early manuscripts.
About that, Angie, I just disappeared for 1 second. I think my connection went out, but can you just repeat that one more time?
Yes, I mentioned the Pen America Awards.
Yes. Those are great. Those are really, really good ones. The Whiting Awards are really great. There's a lot of really good awards out there for people who have not yet been published by a mainstream press, who maybe don't even have an agent, but the agents watch those lists really closely. So you know, if you win one of those prizes, or if you get on a short list even, that can be a great way to have agents suddenly knocking on your door. So I would definitely recommend looking into those, and also just, trying to get published in any way that you can. Like, I know it's easier said than done, but if before you've queried agents, you're able to place an essay somewhere, or even publish a piece, like self-publish a piece that you're able to like put out on social media that has some traction. Those are all ways to, again, to just kind of catch the eye.
In other words, it's also building kind of a resume of your writing, right?
Exactly. Yes.
So even though you have a small press, or even though you were published in online magazine or whatnot, those writings count.
They definitely count, and they definitely make you more appealing to the agents and the editors. So, and don't be afraid to include those on your cover letter too. It's important that that the agents see that you have already started putting your byline out there and getting your name out there. That's going to really help you in terms of getting representation.
Wonderful. Now, does a literary agent charge the writer for brokering a deal with an editor?
Yes. So agents get a commission for the deals. So it's usually 15%. So let's say you get a $100,000 advance, the agent would get 15,000 of that. And it's also worth noting, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but the advance is usually paid out in quarters. So you wouldn't just get that, that might seem like a lot of money at first, but you're not going to get it all right away. So there's a signing advance. When you sign the contract, you get a quarter of it. And then when you deliver your final manuscript, after it's been fully edited with your editor, you'll get another quarter. And then usually the hardcover publication, you'll get another quarter. And then the paperback publication, you'll get another quarter. And sometimes the payout's different. Like it depends on the level of the advance. Sometimes if it's a bit lower, you can have your payout be in halves or quarters, so you get your money sooner. Sometimes if it's a really big advance, it's paid in fifths. But yes, the agent does take a cut because they're kind of doing the work of negotiating on your behalf and using all of their connections to editors and kind of their reputations and everything to get you the best deal they can. And, they can also be really helpful if down the road there's interest from film and TV. They can kind of help broker those deals. So an agent can do a lot for you. They can help place short stories and essays once you start working together. Like often agents will sign authors who don't have full manuscripts. Like they'll have read this partial and think that it's really promising, or they'll have read like an essay that they love from the author and they think, I really want to represent this person, but they don't actually have a full manuscript. So while they're waiting, they might try to, in the same way that you want to try to like get your byline out there before signing an agent, they're going to want to help you put your byline out there before signing an editor. So that's another thing that an agent can be.
So you don't need a full manuscript when you query an agent?
Correct. You don't. I mean,
how much of a manuscript would you need then for them to think it's substantial enough to maybe possibly publish?
So it depends a little bit on the genre. I would say with nonfiction, you almost never need a full manuscript. In some cases, you just need a really great idea and a really great pitch. And even when they're sending it to editors, they're going to just send what's called a proposal. And the proposal usually has, it's basically like a 60-page version of your cover letter. Like it's going to give a little bio about you. It's going to give the positioning of the book. So like the, comparative titles, the market, the readership, etc. It's going to usually include some sample chapters. So maybe like 3 sample chapters or so to give the editor a sense of what your writing is like. So when you're querying agents on the nonfiction side, sometimes that's really all you need. If it's a novel, I think it's probably helpful to have a full draft, even if it hasn't really been fully edited. There are some agents that will take novels on partial just because the writing is so promising or the idea is so promising that they'll, you know, kind of take that risk and sign you up, even if they haven't seen how the story, you know, really goes. But with fiction submissions to editors, they usually want to submit the full manuscript. So you may get an agent. I mean, I have novels that I've bought where the agent signed them based on a short story. So they didn't really even have, in some cases, the idea for the novel yet, but they were just so drawn to this particular story that the author had written or this idea that they had for their future novel. So yeah, so basically that's kind of a non-answer because like there isn't really a clear-cut way, but I would say like if you have what you think is a really cool idea for a novel and you have, you know, a synopsis, like a summary of kind of where you think the story is going and you have a few chapters, you know, it might be worth putting feelers out and seeing if you can get an agent on the basis of that.
So is that what some consider a book proposal? When you don't have a full manuscript, but you have this idea that you want to fulfill, but you need the backing of an editor and publishing house.
Exactly. And that, you know, it's more common with nonfiction because often with nonfiction, you have this great idea, but you need to do research, you need to travel to do it, and you need that seed money. So when you get your advance for signing the contract, you then have some money that you can, you know, put towards finishing the book.
And I assume that there's a vast difference between what a book proposal looks like and what a query for a finished manuscript looks like, right? Yeah. And those are things that I assume our writers could Google and figure out what it is, what the requirements are for those, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. So with a proposal, that's something like for a nonfiction proposal that an editor would get, like that I would get emailed to me from an agent. That proposal is something that you would work very closely with your agent on because they know, you know, exactly what form it should take, what editors are looking for. They've been doing this for years and years. This is their job.
They'll give you the guidance you need to
exactly
submit.
So don't worry too much about getting everything in the proposal just right. The most important thing for you to have when you're querying them is that cover letter that we talked about and the query basically, and then a few chapters if you have them, just so that they can get a sense of your writing.
Okay, now when it comes to the manuscript, some writers believe that it needs to be fully edited, that it needs to have, if it's a children's book, that you need to include the illustrations. Like, how finished does an editor want this manuscript? Do you accept manuscripts that already have illustrations in it and that it's fully, you know, what we would say is fully edited, but we know very well that once it reaches the hands of a publisher, they have their own editing team?
Yeah. So I would say, first of all, like agents do a lot of editing too. So that will be a really important step, is getting edits from your agent. And especially as you're, you know, working on your proposal, putting it together, putting the finishing touches on your manuscript to send to publishers, they'll give you really good feedback. Like almost all agents now edit. That's a bit of a relatively new thing. But I think just because the market has gotten pretty tough, editors expect, like, it's just easier to sell a book to an editor if it's already at a pretty high level. And that doesn't mean that the editor isn't also going to want to do like several rounds of editing with the author, but you know, they'll at least help you like make sure that there aren't typos, that it's cleaned up. And if they see like really serious issues with a plot point or a structural, you know, decision that you've made, they'll give you that feedback and work with you. So so you can expect to probably do a fair amount of editorial work with your agent even before it gets to the editor. And I would say, I mean, again, you're trying to catch the eye of the agents that you're querying. So you want to be putting your best foot forward. You want to be, you know, sending in something that you're really proud of, that you've worked hard on, that is in, you know, good enough shape that they'll want to sign on to work with you. But if you've pushed as hard as you can, like, that's what an editor is for. An editor is, you know, like, my job is to kind of help you when you've taken it as far as you can, to be a pair of fresh eyes and be able to give that feedback that is just really hard to see when you've been in the weeds with a manuscript for so long. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, but
yes. So in terms of searching for an agent, a lot of our stories, our Latino stories, include our language, our traditions, our culture, and those nuances aren't understood by people who aren't Latinos, right? So what should we be asking an agent so that we know that we're being represented by the right person, right? So that we know that they're not going to take our story and completely take out everything that is that we love about our manuscript, that it's going to, you know, appear polished, but with everything that all the love and our stories that we've put into it.
Definitely. So that's when it's really important to have conversations with everybody that you're going to be working with before you sign with them. So that begins with the agenting step. Like, I think it can be really exciting to get your first agent response. You know, like, someone has read your book, they're excited to talk to you, and that's so thrilling, especially, you know, it's such a long road to get there. And I think sometimes authors forget that the agent is working for you. Like, they are your client to a certain degree more than the other way around. And you want to make sure that they are doing what you need them to do. And it's, you know, I mean, again, I hate to say this because it's easy to say it. It's different when it's your book and your career. But in some cases, I think it's better to not sign with someone than to sign with someone who is not going to represent you the way that you deserve and need. And so I think it's important when you're going into that process to make sure that you are taking the time to, like, ask the questions that you need to figure out, you know, what this person thinks of your work, what kinds of contacts they have in the industry in terms of, like, which editors they would want to send it to, what those editors' lists are like, what other clients this agent represents. And a lot of that can be found on their website. So if it's someone who has, you know, a roster of voices from, like, all different perspectives and backgrounds, that's, you know, that's probably a relatively good sign, but you'd still want to have that conversation and really, you know, really ask, like, don't be afraid to really ask them questions. And then similarly, when your book is out to editors and you're starting to get all those exciting phone calls from editors saying, you know, I loved your book, I want to work with you, like, you have to make sure that there's a connection there and that you trust that editor. And almost all editors will have a phone call with a potential author before signing them. That's definitely something that I always do, and it's one of my favorite parts of my job. Like, it's as like a reader, first and foremost, it's so exciting to get to, you know, talk to an author whose book I just fell in love with.
Right.
And I think on that call, I would always be very upfront with the author about the changes that I think need to be made. If I have, like, major editorial suggestions, I would make sure that I know what those are on that call so that there are no surprises down the line. And that's not to say that there won't be, you know, some things that come up that you're not expecting, or, you know, in another round of editing, you come up with some edit that you didn't see initially, but it would never be, like, a huge thing. And, you know, I think one important thing about being an editor is just, especially, like, as a white editor, editing authors of color and marginalized voices, it's so important to me to, you know, if I'm even like in the copy editing stage, if there's a stylistic choice that the author has made, if there's a grammatical choice or a spelling choice, like sometimes that's not a mistake. It's something that's extremely intentional. And
Yes,
I
yes,
think
that was going to be my next question, especially our usage of Spanglish, of words, that are Spanish. For example, myself as a Dominican, we speak Spanish, but in Dominican, but we also use these words that aren't really, it's like we have our own dialect, right?
yep.
Our own words that we make up, but it's how we understand each other. And as a white editor, you might not be familiar with those words, so I could just imagine myself arguing with an editor saying, no, that word needs to be there. I understand that you don't understand what it is, but I understand the context in which I'm using it. And, maybe you're not going to find the word in the dictionary, in a Spanish
Completely.
dictionary, but it's definitely something that we use to express ourselves. So
Yep.
this just brings me back to AWP. I attended the conference, I believe it was early last year, and I was sitting in a conversation where this lady was talking about her story and how she had spoken about a war and a bombing that happened in one of Middle Eastern country where she was part of, and her editor continuously questioned whether or not that really happened. So to me, I would be highly offended if, I'm giving you a nonfiction work and, because your beliefs are limited, now you're trying to limit mine and my form of expression in these books. Because as you know, we're not familiar with every culture and every tradition in this world. So,
Yeah.
how do we fix that?
Definitely. Well, and I think another problem, I mean, this is why it's such a problem that editorial especially is so predominantly white. I think it's like 90% white, or something, crazy. And part of the problem is then, I'm reading from the perspective, like from my background and my perspective. And that means sometimes that like there's almost this assumed white reader too, where like if I'm querying something that I don't understand and, asking the author to change it or tweak it in some way to make it clearer to me, that's implying that like most readers will share my background, when there are going to be plenty of readers who won't need any kind of further context. And I think that's something that like I've definitely come to understand more in my years of editing, and working with writers like Angie Cruz has, made me hopefully like better at that. And just, that's something that I've been thinking a lot about. And, there used to be a convention that if a word was in a language other than English, it would be italicized. Sometimes there would be a glossary in the back with definitions of those words. Sometimes there would be like footnotes giving the definition of those words.
But we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah, like I think that's something that people are not doing as much anymore, which I think is a good thing, because there's a way in which that sets it apart as other, when, as you were saying, like you're, like when you, even just like with Spanglish or with, ways of speaking that are blending languages, like it's perfectly clear, really. I mean, there might be an unfamiliar word to some readers, but usually within the context, you can easily understand it. Or, now there's Google, like you can just Google it and look it up. And I think
exactly, which is, we don't ask white people to explain something to us and include footnotes. So yeah. I feel that if we as writers of color include anything that you don't understand, you should go look it up.
Exactly.
And we're here to tell you the story. We shouldn't also have to do the job of explaining certain things to you. If you didn't get it, your duty is to go look it up.
Exactly.
Right? And, one thing I do want to say is that as writers of color, we don't write for the white gaze. And what I mean is that we don't write for the white reader. We read for people who look like us, because we want to feel represented in our stories. And, if I remember correctly, Dominicana was one of those books that took quite a bit for a publisher to pick up because they didn't think that the story was marketable. For Lord and behold, it turns out that every immigrant woman, not only Dominican women, were able to identify with Anna.
Yeah.
Correct? And I also remember that when I was asking for advanced readers copies, it was very limited. Right? So it made me think, did the publisher invest a small amount in this book because they felt that it wasn't going to sell?
I mean,
not to share your business. I'm just saying.
No, of course.
I don't. If you don't feel comfortable asking that question, it's okay. But it makes me think. You know, when I'm out there trying to promote books by our writers, and I find that it's so difficult for me to get my hands on an ARC, those things do come into my mind because, not to give this book more promotion, but when American Dirt came out, everyone and their mom got a copy.
Yeah.
There was a heavy investment in that book, and it wasn't even told by a Latino writer.
Completely. I think that's completely fair comparison to make. I mean, I think with Dominicana, like there was so much passion and excitement from our team for that book, and it didn't get the level of support that American Dirt did. No book that I've ever seen at Flatiron has gotten that level of attention. It was kind of its own stratosphere, and not just from us, but kind of from every stage of accounts from the different, everybody that kind of touched it. But of course, that all started with us in the way that we were pushing it out. And I think with Dominicana, like it was just amazing for me to see because I had, to me, it was such a big story, and it was, like my comps for it were things like True Girls in Brooklyn or like just these kind of classic huge coming of age stories, and it was just so special that like it felt like something that any reader could see themselves in. And one of my favorite stories from Angie's book tour was she went to a conference, literally she was sort of like, what am I doing here? Like, there's going to be a lot of, older white women who are coming to this from Kansas. Like, are they really going to be able to see themselves in the story? Or what's their response going to be? And so many talked to her after 16, 18, like, I didn't love my husband. Like, this is my story. And I think there's something so universal in Dominicana. In addition to being so specific to this story, and it's that combination of, like, I think that's the power that fiction has, is that it can be at once so specific and, take you into a world that maybe you don't know much about, but it also has this incredible resonance for so many people who, I mean, it's, it's about so much. It's about girlhood, and the event that Angie was just doing was about girlhood and power, and I think this book has so much to say about that. And we, like, kind of the constant struggle of an editor is there are some books that just sort of by necessity are quote unquote lead titles, and those books get a bigger push in terms of the finances that are put behind them from the company. And I wish that we could do that equally for every book, but we just can't. And that is decided on by a lot of people. And sometimes the editor, can only do so much to kind of push that out. But with Dominicana, like I do think, even if we didn't have as many ARCs as for American Dirt, we had a lot. And that was really helpful, actually, in terms of getting all the amazing quotes that we got and sending it to tons of booksellers and librarians. And, it was an Indie Next pick, and maybe we could have done a lot more. But when one of my favorite moments was when it was picked by Good Morning America for as their very first book club pick. And I think that was such a testament to what we all thought, like what I certainly thought about it, what I know you felt about it, which is that it's, you know, it's a story for everyone, for like all readers. And to, like, I think these big book clubs have so much power now, in terms of shaping people's reading taste and the conversation. And it's, you know, people really trust the like Reese Witherspoons and the Good Morning Americas and the Oprahs of the world to help them decide what to read. And
don't forget those bookstagrammers, though.
Don't forget those bookstagrammers.
Because bookstagrammers are now a big influence. They use their platforms to promote these books and to help these authors sell their books.
Yeah.
So, you know, I hope, I mean, I see now that Maria Hinojosa is having an Instagram conversation with Lupita Reeds, who is a bookstagrammer. And I was so happy that finally a bookstagrammer is getting acknowledged for the work that she does.
Oh,
because they do push these books out there, and a lot of people follow them and they hang on their very word when it comes to what they should be reading next. And I think publishers need to do a much better job at building these relationships with bookstagrammers, you know, as a means to promote their author's work.
Completely. Lupita's, I mean, she's such a superstar. She was actually hosting the event that Angie just did, and she was such a champion of Dominicana. And she, yeah, I mean, they're amazing. They're, in many cases, they're just, you know, people who love books, and they do so much incredible work to get the word out. And
they're doing it for free.
Yeah.
They're doing all this work for free. So put a little budget when you publish these books, set a budget aside for bookstagrammers.
Yeah.
You know, the publishing industry needs to update themselves and change the manner in which they do things, because the times are changing. Bookstagrammers didn't exist 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. Right, but now it's a booming influence that publishers definitely need to be taking advantage of. So continuing on with our conversation, I wanted to ask you, what does it look like to work with an editor as part of a big publishing house? Mm-hmm. What does that process look like?
So I can say for me, so the first thing would be, you know, I would read your book on submission, fall head over heels in love with it, have a great phone call with you. And then if there's other people interested, there's an auction. And actually, even before the auction, if a publisher really, really loves something and is super gung-ho about it and had an amazing call with the author and really wants to pursue it, they might try to preempt it, which is when you put in a bid before the auction. So you're taking a little bit of a risk as a publisher, because maybe you're, you know, paying a high amount and the book wouldn't go that high in auction. But maybe, you know, you're seizing the moment and showing your enthusiasm, and maybe in the auction it would have gone even higher. You never really know. But a preempt can be a way to really send a signal to the author and the agent that you just so badly want this book. And if you don't preempt the book, then the book goes to auction if there's more than one person interested. And auctions can be run in all different kinds of ways. Every agent has their own.
Wait, so how does that work? Because if I have a manuscript and I've given it to an agent, and an agent, so the agent is shopping it to various editors at different publishing houses, correct? That's the case?
Exactly. In very few circumstances, they might decide, like, I know exactly who I want this to go to. Or maybe the author has, already has a relationship with some editor, and they say, you know, I really want to go with this person, assuming that they're willing to give me what I deserve. But in most cases, an agent will be submitting to a lot of different editors. So, maybe like even a dozen or more from all different kinds of publishing houses. So
this is what happened, not to cut you off, because I want people to understand, because I know that when American Dirt came out, a lot of people were asking, and even myself, I had no idea books went into auction. So when I was reading about this book and I was reading this information and I kept seeing the word auction, I'm like, what do you mean these
What
books
is
go
that?
to auction? What does that mean? And
Yeah.
then I looked it up and I was like, I was shocked, first of all, because I had no idea that happened to books. But that's when I understood that if more than one publisher is really interested in this book, then you guys go bid on it.
Exactly, exactly. So, you know, in some cases, I've had books that I'm the only person that is interested. And, you know, that's all it takes really in terms of getting someone to sign. You know, like it really just takes one editor to fall in love to get a book deal. But when you have a big auction, that's when the advance can go really high because, you know, editors are all competing with each other, publishers are competing with each other to try to get this book. And so, you know, the advance will probably be higher if it goes to auction.
And that commission for the agent.
Exactly, exactly. So, you know, so the agent wants to get their author the best deal. So the agent is trying, and that's why, you know, a huge part of the job of an editor and an agent is just meeting as many, in my case, like meeting as many agents as I can, and in their case, meeting as many editors as they can, trying to figure out what everybody's taste is, what everybody's looking for, so that when they get, you know, the next great novel, they know which editors to send it to, so that that editor will then want to, you know, to bid on the book in the auction. So a huge part of our job is this kind of social component of figuring out who everybody is in the industry and what everybody's looking for and kind of who your, you know, kindred spirits are in terms of taste. So yeah, so that's the first step is, you know, the actual buying of the book, and that can take place in all these different ways. And then we get to do the fun part, which is the editing itself. And as I had mentioned before, usually I would have a long phone call with the author before buying the book, so they kind of have a sense of what to expect from my first editorial letter. But I would also do what's called a line edit, which is when I go, you know, an editorial letter is usually a bit more broad. It's a bit more structural. It might say like, I loved this character, but this character felt a little flat for me, or it felt underdeveloped, or, you know, I didn't like this part of the ending. I felt like this scene could be beefed up a lot. You know, kind of bigger structural edits would go into the editorial letter, and then the line edit. And all of this is happening electronically now, so especially during the pandemic. So it's all in track changes in Microsoft Word. And in the line edit, I go through page by page, and I'm reading the sentences and saying, you know, like, this sentence is so beautiful, or, you know, this sentence is a little confusing. I don't think this word is quite right. You know, it's kind of fun to like really be in the weeds with someone in terms of the language that they're using, and say, you know, like, sometimes I'll have back and forth about a single word choice. Like, I really love that kind of editing where, especially with fiction, it's so important that the language be really precise and polished. And that doesn't mean, like, as we were saying before, that it's perfectly, you know, quote unquote, like high English or whatever. But I just mean, like, I kind of see my job as an editor as helping an author and their book like achieve its highest possible potential. So like a huge part of those editorial calls at the beginning are figuring out which editors see what your book is trying to do and know how to help you get it there if it's not.
So now, when we include other languages in our writing,
Mm-hmm.
How does that editor make sure that it's correct? Is the writer able to choose or say, I have this person that I trust, can they work with you while you're doing this, or is it could that person be hired by the publisher to work on, you know, on the manuscript as well? What does that look like?
Yeah. So I think this is kind of getting at your question in a slightly roundabout way, but I think one thing that even I didn't really understand until I got into publishing is that there are two different editorial tracks. There's editorial and then production editorial, and production editorial is the department that has the copy editors and the proofreaders. And I think especially like in the last couple of years, as part of a lot of the diversity and inclusion efforts at publishing houses, there's been a real push to expand the ranks of those copy editors and proofreaders and try to find people from marginalized backgrounds and people who speak other languages, so that when they're copy editing, they're coming from that perspective. So I think that can be really helpful. And
yes,
if you have an author who is, for instance, like a Spanish speaker, and there might be some Spanish in the book, or there's, like the characters and the author share, a Dominican American heritage, for instance, really trying to find a copy editor and proofreader who also has that background, I think that can be really helpful.
yes.
And if the author has suggestions, for people that we could hire, I would definitely be open to that and expanding those databases on our end. And, a lot of authors have a writing community that they've been working with, not even if you've, like, maybe you didn't go to an MFA program, but you have, your really trusted writing community of people who read your book first and give you feedback. And I think that can be a really helpful thing too. Like, just because you have an editor at a publishing house doesn't mean that you can't also, get a second read from someone else. And we also, will often work with authenticity readers, or they're also called like expert readers, sensitivity readers. And these are people who, would share the particular background of the characters being portrayed, and could just kind of read and make sure, even if the author themselves also,
So you work with beta readers as well.
Maybe that might be the same word for all of these
for the sensitivity
things.
readers.
Exactly. Like,
so
yeah.
Let's explain to writers what a sensitivity reader is.
Yes. So this is, it's definitely something that you see in nonfiction, but it's really primarily in the fiction space. And let's say you have a novel, just thinking like by a Cuban American writer, and they are writing about Cuban American characters, but maybe there's also a Mexican American character or a Chinese American character. And they want to kind of make sure that that they are kind of getting that marginalized character's background right and getting that voice right. And, because it's fiction, they're not, it's not memoir, it's not exactly their perspective. So they might want a second reader to kind of, who does share that background, to say, like, this feels kind of weird to me, this seems objectionable, like, I think you should look more closely at this moment or this scene or this statement or the way that you've crafted this character. And that can be a really helpful way to make sure that you're representing these characters in the best way. And I think especially when, most of the editors that you're going to be working with are white, as an editor, it can be, and this is on the publisher to hire them. Okay. We want to make sure that we are kind of, checking our own biases and blind spots and things that, that we're going to miss because of our own backgrounds and perspectives. So that's become really important, is getting those second readers, and trying to be as thorough as you can in which readers you're asking. And it's not just, people's racial backgrounds, but also if you have a character who's LGBTQ, if you have a character who, has a disability, just anyone from a sort of marginalized perspective, you want to make sure, if the author doesn't share that background, or even if they do, that you're just, making that representation as strong and fair as you can. Okay.
This live stream is going to cut off. Do you mind continuing and finishing the conversation in another 30 minutes?
Yep.
So I'm just going to end it and save it, and then I'm going to restart the live, and you could request to join. Okay,
that sounds great.
So everyone who's on here, I know some of you submitted your questions via the question mark at the bottom of your screen. Please save your question so that you could submit it in the next live, because I really want to be able to have Caroline answer them for you. The best way for us to answer your question is going to be through that icon, because otherwise it's going to get lost in the comment section. So I'm going to end this live and restart it, and you guys could join once again, and Caroline is going to finish the life cycle of a book with us. Okay.
All right.
See you in a few minutes.
Bye-bye.